What if the most dangerous man in the city was being slowly murdered in his own bed, and the only person who noticed was the woman emptying his trash? Dominic Costello ruled the underground with an iron fist, but a mysterious illness left him paralyzed, wasting away in his penthouse. Everyone said it was bad luck, karma. But Bridget, a plus-sized cleaning woman whom the ruthless cartel treated like a ghost, saw what the highly paid doctors were hiding. She found the poison. Now, she holds the life of a dying mobster in her heavy hands. Welcome to a story of betrayal, dark romance, and a deadly secret. The Costello estate in upstate New York was a monument to blood money. It boasted imported Italian marble floors that required a specific pH-neutral cleaner, Venetian plaster walls that held the echoes of whispered death threats, and crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen tears from the vaulted ceilings. Bridget Collins knew every inch of this sprawling mansion better than the men who owned it. She pushed her heavy industrial cleaning cart down the long, dimly lit hallway of the West Wing. The cart squeaked, a rhythmic, annoying sound, but nobody reprimanded her for it. Nobody ever spoke to Bridget unless they were ordering her to clean up a spill, which usually smelled heavily of bleach and iron. Bridget was 28, exhausted, and undeniably fat. In a world populated by the Mafia's superficial, diamond-draped wives and dangerously thin mistresses, Bridget's thick, heavy-set frame made her a complete anomaly. She wore a drab grey uniform that stretched tight across her wide hips and heavy chest, her hair pulled back into a severe frizzy bun. She carried 260 pounds on a 5'4" frame, and she knew exactly how the world saw her. Slow, lazy, and invisible. But invisibility was a superpower in the Costello syndicate. Men with handguns tucked into the waistbands of their tailored suits would continue their conversations about drug shipments, extortion rackets, and harbor payoffs right in front of her. They'd lean against the walls, puffing on thick cigars, parting just enough to let her push her cart through. To them, she wasn't a woman. She wasn't even a person. She was a piece of the furniture. The fat cleaning lady. "Make sure you get the baseboards in the study, Bridget," a voice snapped. She paused, turning her head. It was Vincent Romano, the underboss and Dominic's cousin. Vincent was sharp-featured, dressed in a charcoal Tom Ford suit, his eyes gleaming with an arrogance that hadn't been there a year ago. "Yes, Mr. Romano," Bridget muttered, keeping her eyes cast downward, playing the part of the submissive, simple servant perfectly. Vincent didn't even wait for her response before turning back to the men flanked beside him. "The docks are ours by Thursday. Keep the pressure on the unions. If Dom asks, tell him everything is running smooth. If Dom asks." Dominic Costello was a name that used to strike terror into the hearts of everyone from Tribeca to Staten Island. He was a ruthless, brilliant tactician who took over the syndicate at 30 after his father's violent passing. He was infamous for his brutal efficiency, his cold, calculating grey eyes, and a terrifying physical presence. But 6 months ago, the king of the New York underworld had fallen. It started with tremors in his hands, then a terrifying loss of balance. Within weeks, Dominic was confined to the master suite on the 3rd floor, struck down by what the private medical staff called a rapid-onset degenerative neurological disease. The man who used to snap necks was now reportedly unable to lift a glass of water. As Bridget scrubbed the baseboards outside the kitchen, she watched Dr. Arthur Pendleton walk by. Pendleton was Dominic's private physician, a man who charged $5,000 a day to keep the boss comfortable. He was flanked by 2 massive enforcers. Pendleton carried a silver medical briefcase. Bridget wrung out her sponge, her thick fingers squeezing the dirty water into the bucket. She watched the doctor's reflection in the polished marble floor. There was something wrong about Dr. Pendleton. When a doctor has a dying patient, their shoulders carry the weight of failure. But Pendleton walked with a spring in his step. He smiled too much when he talked to Vincent Romano in the foyer. Bridget had cleaned hospitals before taking this high-paying, high-risk job. She knew the smell of death, and she knew the look of a doctor fighting a losing battle. Pendleton wasn't fighting a battle at all. He looked like a man executing a perfect, flawless plan. Later that evening, the head housekeeper, a stern woman named Mrs. Gable, found Bridget in the laundry room. "Maria just quit," Mrs. Gable said, rubbing her temples. She went into the boss's room to change the sheets. He threw a glass at the wall, and she had a panic attack. "She's gone." Bridget continued folding a stack of Egyptian cotton towels. "Okay. You're on the master suite duty starting tomorrow," Mrs. Gable ordered. "Go in, clean the bathroom, dust, mop, and get out. Do not speak to Mr. Costello. Do not look him in the eye. If he yells, you keep your mouth shut and finish your job. Understood?" Bridget nodded slowly. Understood. Her heart hammered a heavy, painful rhythm against her ribs. No one wanted to clean the master suite. Even weakened, Dominic Costello was a monster. But as Bridget looked at her calloused hands, a strange, dark curiosity bloomed in her chest. The ghost of the corridors was about to step into the devil's lair. The air inside the third-floor master suite was stifling. It smelled heavily of rubbing alcohol, expensive sandalwood, and the distinct sour odor of a body breaking down in cold sweats. Bridget pushed her cart through the double oak doors, the wheels silent on the plush Persian rugs. The room was cast in shadows. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn tight against the morning sun. In the center of the massive room was a four-poster mahogany bed, and in it lay Dominic Costello. Bridget kept her head down, but she couldn't help but steal a glance. He looked terrible. His skin, once a healthy olive tone, was ashen and pulled taut across his cheekbones. Dark, bruised circles hung under his eyes. He was hooked up to an IV pole, a clear fluid dripping steadily into a vein in his heavily tattooed forearm. He didn't move as she began her work. Bridget started in the corner, dusting the antique bookshelves. She moved slowly, her breathing deliberately quiet. Her large body took up space, but she moved with practiced silence, a skill honed by a lifetime of trying to go unnoticed in a world that mocked her size. Suddenly, the door opened. Dr. Pendleton walked in, followed by Vincent Romano. Bridget immediately froze, pressing herself into the alcove near the master bathroom. She was out of their direct line of sight. "How is he this morning, Doc?" Vincent asked. His voice was laced with faux concern, but Bridget could hear the underlying impatience. "Deteriorating, as expected," Dr. Pendleton said, his voice a low, soothing hum. He walked over to the bed. "His muscle tone is severely atrophied. The paralysis is creeping up to his respiratory system. It's a tragedy, Vincent. But the disease is progressing exactly as I outlined." "Can he hear us?" Vincent asked, stepping closer to the bed. "Unlikely. The sedatives in his IV keep him in a heavy state of dissociation," Pendleton replied. "He's practically a vegetable at this point." Bridget peeked around the corner of the wall. She looked at Dominic. His eyes were half open, staring blankly at the ceiling. But beneath the heavy, drugged haze, she saw a twitch in his jaw, a desperate, furious tightening of his muscles. He can hear them, she realized with a jolt. Dr. Pendleton opened his silver briefcase and pulled out a small amber glass vial. He drew the liquid into a syringe. "Time for his morning pain management," the doctor murmured, injecting the clear liquid directly into the IV port. "How much longer, Artie?" Vincent asked softly. 2 weeks, maybe 3, Pendleton said. "His heart will simply give out. It will look entirely natural, a tragic end to an aggressive disease." Bridget clapped her hand over her mouth. Her wide chest heaved as she stifled a gasp. Murder. She was witnessing a slow, agonizing murder. Pendleton casually tossed the empty amber vial into the small medical waste bin near the nightstand. The two men left the room, the heavy oak doors clicking shut behind them. The silence that followed was suffocating. Bridget stood frozen in the alcove for 5 full minutes. She should finish dusting and leave. She was a cleaning lady who made barely enough to pay rent on a miserable apartment in Queens. The Mafia's business was not her business. If she breathed a word of this, Vincent would have her stuffed into an oil drum and dropped into the Hudson River. But as she stepped out of the alcove, her eyes met Dominic's. He was looking at her. His head hadn't moved, but his grey eyes had shifted. They were bloodshot, glassy, and filled with a rage so profound it made Bridget's breath catch. He couldn't speak. He couldn't scream for help. He was trapped inside his own decaying body, entirely at the mercy of the men killing him. Bridget swallowed hard. She walked over to the bed, gripping her cleaning rag tightly in her plump hands. She looked down at the fearsome mob boss. "I'm just going to empty the trash, Mr. Costello," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. She crouched down beside the nightstand. Her knees popped loudly in the quiet room. She reached into the small medical waste bin, her gloved fingers bypassing the cotton swabs and empty wrappers, until she found the small amber vial Pendleton had discarded. She slipped it deep into the pocket of her grey apron. That night, in the safety of her cramped apartment, Bridget sat at her tiny kitchen table. The flickering light of her laptop illuminated her exhausted face. She had peeled the half-torn label off the vial. It read, "Thallium sulfate, diluted/atracurium besylate." She typed the names into the search engine. Her blood ran cold as the results populated. Thallium was a heavy metal, historically used as a rat poison. It was tasteless, odorless, and caused severe neurological damage, hair loss, and eventual organ failure. It was notorious for mimicking degenerative nerve diseases. Atracurium was a paralytic used in surgeries to relax muscles. Pendleton wasn't treating a disease, he was inducing one. He was poisoning Dominic with heavy metals to destroy his nervous system, and using paralytics to make sure the mob boss couldn't physically fight back or call for help. Bridget leaned back in her chair, the cheap wood groaning under her weight. She stared at the vial on the table. She had the proof. She had the whole truth in the palm of her hand. "What do I do?" she whispered to the empty room. If she went to the police, the Costello cartel would kill her before she even made it to the witness stand. Vincent owned half the precincts in the city anyway. If she went to Dominic's loyal capos, they'd demand proof she couldn't provide, and Vincent would just kill her for stirring up trouble. There was only one person who could do anything about it. The dead man walking. The next morning, it was raining. Heavy sheets of water battered the massive windows of the Costello estate, masking the sounds of the sprawling household. Bridget pushed her cart into the master suite at exactly 10 a.m. She had tracked Pendleton's schedule. The doctor wouldn't be back until noon. Vincent was out at a meeting with the Russian syndicate. She locked the heavy oak doors behind her. The click of the lock sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Dominic was in the same position as yesterday. His breathing was shallow, a slight wheeze escaping his pale lips. The IV bag hung above him, slowly dripping the poison into his veins. Bridget walked straight to the IV pole. Her hands were shaking, slick with sweat. She reached up, her thick arms trembling with the effort, and clamped the IV tube shut. The dripping stopped. Then she reached into her pocket, pulled out a sterilized pair of scissors she had brought from home, and snipped the IV line entirely. Dominic's eyes fluttered open. The sudden cessation of the constant agonizing drip seemed to jolt his failing nervous system. He stared at her, his grey eyes fighting through the fog of the paralytics. "What are you?" His voice was barely a rasp, like dry leaves scraping against concrete. It was the first time she had heard him speak. It was weak, but still carried an unmistakable authority. Bridget stepped back, her heart hammering wildly. "I'm stopping the drip, Mr. Costello." His jaw clenched. "Guards!" He tried to shout, but it came out as a pathetic, airy whisper. "I'll have you skinned. Save your breath," Bridget said, her voice surprisingly steady. The fear was still there, but a fierce, protective defiance was overriding it. She stepped closer to the bed, towering over the fallen king. "Your guards are downstairs playing poker. Your cousin is out selling your territory to the Russians. And your doctor is the one putting you in the grave." Dominic's eyes widened slightly. A flicker of something dangerous ignited in his pupils. Bridget reached into her pocket and pulled out the empty amber vial. She held it up to the dim light. Thallium sulfate, rat poison, mixed with a heavy surgical paralytic. "That's what's in your IV bag, Mr. Costello. You don't have a degenerative disease. Vincent is poisoning you." Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Dominic stared at the vial, then slowly dragged his gaze back to Bridget's face. He looked at her deeply, really seeing her for the first time. He took in her broad shoulders, her round, flushed face, the frizzy hair escaping her bun, and the sheer, unadulterated terror she was bravely trying to hide. "Why?" he rasped, his throat working hard to form the words. "Why? Tell me." Bridget let out a shaky breath. "Because it's wrong," she said simply. "And because I know what it's like to have everyone in the room look right past you, to decide what your worth is without your permission. They think you're already dead. They think you can't fight back." Dominic let out a low, dark sound. It took Bridget a moment to realize it was a laugh, a dry, bitter, terrifying chuckle. "Who are you?" he whispered. "My name is Bridget. I'm the cleaning lady." "Bridget!" He tasted her name, his voice growing a fraction stronger now that the steady stream of paralytics was halted. He tried to move his hand. His fingers twitched, dragging an inch across the silk sheets. The effort left him panting. "If you leave me like this, they'll know. I know," Bridget said. "I brought a saline flush. I'm going to hook a clean bag up to your port. It's just salt water. Pendleton won't know the difference unless he tests the bag himself, and he's too arrogant to do that." Dominic's grey eyes locked onto hers, burning with a sudden, hellish intensity. The dying man was gone. The mob boss had returned, trapped in a broken cage, but his mind was rapidly clearing. "You're taking a massive risk, Bridget," he whispered. "If Vincent catches you, he won't just kill you. He'll make it last weeks." "I'm well aware, Mr. Costello." She moved to the medical cart, pulling out a fresh saline bag she had smuggled in under her heavy apron. "Dom," he commanded softly. "Call me Dom." Bridget paused, looking back at him. The intimacy of the request sent a strange shiver down her spine. "Okay, Dom." "Listen to me very carefully," Dominic rasped, his eyes never leaving hers. "The poison. It takes time to leave the system. I need an antidote. Prussian blue. It binds to the thallium, flushes it out." "Prussian blue," Bridget repeated, nodding. "I can try to find some, but you have to pretend you're still dying. If they see you recovering, they'll just shoot you in your sleep." "I know how to play dead," Dominic said, a wicked, cruel smile touching the corners of his pale lips. "I need you to be my eyes, Bridget, my ears. You're invisible to them. You're perfect." Bridget hooked up the saline bag, her fingers brushing against his cold, tattooed arm. For a split second, Dominic's fingers weakly curled around her wrist. His grip was pathetic, lighter than a child's, but the intent behind it was monumental. "You saved my life, Bridget," he whispered, his voice vibrating with a dark, terrifying promise. "And I swear to God, I will lay this entire city at your feet. Anyone who ever made you feel invisible, I'll make sure they never see the sun again." Bridget looked down at the ruthless Mafia boss. She was a fat, broke, exhausted cleaning lady. He was a billionaire criminal with blood on his hands. But in this dark, oppressive room, they were the only two people telling the truth. "Just focus on staying alive, Dom," she said softly, gently removing his hand from her wrist. "I'll handle the rest." As Bridget unlocked the door and pushed her cleaning cart back into the opulent, deadly hallways of the Costello estate, she realized her life was over. The invisible girl was gone. She had just made a pact with the devil, and God help her, she was going to see it through. Procuring a highly restricted heavy metal antidote without a prescription, while living on a cleaning woman's salary, was theoretically impossible. But Bridget Collins had grown up in the forgotten, rusted underbelly of Queens. She knew the spaces where the law didn't quite reach. On her day off, she took the subway deep into Brooklyn, exiting in a neighborhood where the storefronts had barred windows and the streetlights were permanently shattered. She walked 3 blocks, her heavy thighs chafing in her worn denim jeans, pulling her oversized jacket tighter against the bitter wind. She stopped in front of a dingy pharmacy with a flickering neon sign that read, "Finch's Apothecary." Albert Finch was a disgraced former chemist whose medical license had been revoked in the 90s for distributing off-book narcotics. Now, he operated out of a cramped, foul-smelling shop, catering to the city's desperate, the uninsured, and the criminal. The bell above the door jingled a dull, flat note. Finch, a gaunt man with thin, greased-back hair and thick spectacles, looked up from his counter. He eyed Bridget's wide, unassuming figure with a mixture of boredom and impatience. "We're out of diet pills," Finch rasped, lighting a cigarette right there in the shop. Bridget felt the familiar sting of the insult, the casual cruelty she endured daily. But she didn't shrink away. She thought of Dominic Costello's grey eyes, burning with a furious will to live. She stepped up to the counter and placed a stack of crisp $100 bills, her entire emergency savings, hidden for years under her mattress, onto the scratched glass. "I don't want diet pills," Bridget said, her voice dropping to a low, steady timbre. "I need Prussian blue, Radio Gardace, and I need a lot of it." Finch's cigarette stopped halfway to his mouth. His eyes narrowed behind his thick lenses. He looked at the money, then back up at the fat, exhausted woman standing before him. The calculation in his eyes shifted from dismissal to wary curiosity. Prussian blue wasn't a recreational drug. It was used for one thing: flushing out lethal radioactive isotopes or heavy metals. "That is a highly monitored substance, sweetheart," Finch muttered, his voice dropping. "Feds keep a tight lid on it. You looking to cure a rat problem, or did someone slip you something nasty?" "The money is there," Bridget said firmly, tapping the stack of bills with a thick finger. $2,000. No questions asked. That's how this works, isn't it? Finch stared at her for a long moment, assessing the risk. He finally exhaled a plume of blue smoke, scooped up the cash, and disappeared into the back room. When he returned, he slid a plain white, unlabeled plastic bottle across the counter. It rattled with capsules. 50 pills, Finch said. "Crush them, mix them with liquid. It'll turn the mouth blue, and the stomach cramps will feel like swallowing glass. If whoever is taking this is already on death's door, the cure might just finish the job." "Thank you," Bridget murmured, dropping the bottle into her purse. She walked out into the freezing rain, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had the cure. Now came the hard part. Smuggling the pills into the Costello estate was easier than she anticipated. Invisibility remained her greatest asset. When she arrived for her shift the next morning, the security guards at the service entrance barely glanced at her. They checked the bags of the young, attractive maids, flirting and joking, but they waved Bridget through with a dismissive flick of the wrist. Just the fat cleaning lady. At 10:15 a.m., She locked herself inside the master suite. Dominic was awake, his eyes darting toward the door the second the deadbolt clicked. He looked worse today. The lack of the paralytic in the morning had allowed his body to process some of the agonizing pain of his failing nerves. Sweat beaded on his pale forehead, and his breathing was a harsh, ragged wheeze. "You made it," Dominic rasped, the words tearing at his dry throat. "I told you I would," Bridget whispered, hurrying over to her cart. She pulled a small mortar and pestle from beneath her stack of clean rags. She had practiced this in her tiny kitchen. She emptied 3 of the capsules into the bowl and began grinding them into a fine, bright blue powder. "What did Pendleton say?" Dominic asked, his eyes tracking her every movement. "He checked your vitals an hour ago. He noted a slight elevation in your heart rate, but he chalked it up to a localized fever," Bridget said, mixing the blue powder into a small cup of water. "I swapped the IV bags right before he came in, then swapped them back to the saline the second he left. It's a terrifying game of musical chairs, Dom." Dominic let out a harsh, rasping breath. "You're a natural." Bridget brought the cup to his lips. "Finch said this is going to hurt. A lot." "I've taken bullets to the chest, Bridget," Dominic said, a dark, arrogant fire flickering in his hollow eyes. "Give me the damn cure." She slid a thick, gentle arm under his neck, supporting his head. His skin was unnaturally cold, his hair damp with sweat. She carefully tipped the cup against his lips. Dominic swallowed the bitter, chalky blue liquid. He gagged instinctively, his throat convulsing, but he forced it down through sheer, terrifying willpower. Almost immediately, a violent shudder ripped through his body. His back arched off the mattress, a strangled, agonizing groan escaping his lips. The muscles in his neck strained, veins popping violently. "Dom!" Bridget panicked, reaching out to hold his shoulders down. "Dom! Hold on!" His hands, which had been practically paralyzed for a month, suddenly jerked up. His fingers dug into Bridget's forearms with shocking, bruising force. He wasn't fully strong, but the adrenaline and agony gave him a terrifying jolt of power. He squeezed her arms so hard she gasped in pain, but she didn't pull away. She leaned her heavy weight over him, grounding him, murmuring soft, desperate reassurances until the violent spasm finally passed. Dominic collapsed back against the pillows, panting heavily. His lips were stained a faint, terrifying blue. He slowly opened his eyes, looking up at Bridget. She was hovering over him, her face flushed, her eyes wide with terror and concern. He looked down at his own hands, then at the red bruising marks he had just left on her thick forearms. "I moved," he whispered, the realization crashing over him. "I actually moved." Bridget wiped a tear from her cheek, letting out a shaky laugh. "Yeah, you moved. Now we just have to make sure nobody else knows." Over the next 2 weeks, the master suite became a sanctuary of secrets. By day, the room was a stage. Dr. Pendleton would arrive, check Dominic's fabricated vitals, and arrogantly administer the poisoned IV bags that Bridget expertly swapped out moments later. Vincent Romano would stand at the foot of the bed, mocking his dying cousin, bragging about the territory he was giving away, completely unaware that the man lying in the bed was memorizing every single word. By night, the room transformed. Bridget had traded shifts with a superstitious maid who was terrified of the dark, sprawling estate. Now, Bridget worked the graveyard shift. Between midnight and 4 a.m., the mansion was silent, save for the patrolling guards on the perimeter. During these hours, the ghost of the corridors became the sole confidant of the underworld king. Dominic's recovery was slow, grueling, and entirely hidden. The Prussian blue was working, aggressively pulling the heavy metals from his tissues. His skin began to lose its ashen pallor. The violent tremors subsided. By the second week, he could sit up unassisted. "Tell me about the outside," Dominic demanded one night. He was sitting up against the headboard, bathed in the soft, golden light of a single bedside lamp. Bridget sat in a plush armchair a few feet away, a basket of laundry in her lap to maintain her cover if anyone walked in. "It's raining again," Bridget said softly, folding a pillowcase. "The streets are flooded down in Queens. My landlord still hasn't fixed the radiator, so I've been sleeping in 3 sweaters." Dominic's jaw tightened. "When I take my city back, you won't ever see Queens again. You'll have an apartment overlooking Central Park, with heated floors." Bridget smiled, a sad, knowing expression. "You don't owe me anything, Dom. I didn't do this for a reward." "Then why did you do it?" he pressed, his voice vibrating with that deep, dark intensity that always made her stomach flutter. He was no longer a dying man. The apex predator was returning, and his gaze was entirely focused on her. "You risked your life for a monster, Bridget. Why?" She stopped folding the laundry. She looked down at her lap, at her large, heavy thighs, her thick waist. "Because I know what it's like to be trapped in a body that the world has already condemned," she whispered. "People look at you and they see a corpse. They look at me and they see a joke, a fat, stupid punchline. They assume I'm lazy, that I'm worthless, just because I take up more space. We were both invisible to them, Dom, and I just wanted to prove them wrong. For once, the silence in the room was thick, heavy with unspoken truths. "Come here," Dominic commanded softly. Bridget hesitated, her heart pounding. She set the laundry basket down and walked over to the edge of the bed. She stood there, acutely aware of how her uniform clung unflatteringly to her belly and hips. In the presence of a man who historically dated runway models and actresses, she felt painfully inadequate. Dominic reached out. His hand was steady now. He bypassed her wrist and gently wrapped his fingers around her hip, resting his palm against the soft, thick curve of her waist. Bridget gasped softly, her entire body rigid. No one touched her like that. No one touched her with reverence. "They are blind, Bridget," Dominic murmured, his grey eyes trailing up her body to meet her gaze. "The men in my world, they surround themselves with plastic, hollow women with hollow eyes. But you are the most real thing I have ever encountered. You have more courage in your little finger than my entire crew of hitmen. You hold the weight of the world, and you do it quietly." His thumb stroked the fabric of her apron, sending a shockwave of heat straight to her core. "You think I see a joke?" he whispered, pulling her slightly closer, his face inches from her stomach. "I see a queen. I see the woman who walked into a lion's den and decided to tame the jungle." Bridget's breath caught in her throat. She looked down at him, tears welling in her eyes. The raw, primal possessiveness in his voice was terrifying, but it was also the most intoxicating thing she had ever heard. She reached out, her trembling, plump fingers brushing through his dark, thick hair. He leaned into her touch, a dangerous man finding solace in the very woman his world had discarded. But their fragile sanctuary was shattered the very next morning. Bridget was mopping the hallway when Dr. Pendleton emerged from the master suite. His face was pale, his arrogant stride replaced by a frantic, nervous energy. He pulled his phone from his pocket, dialing a number rapidly. Bridget immediately ducked behind a marble pillar, straining to listen. "Vincent!" Pendleton hissed into the phone. "We have a problem. I just ran Costello's blood work. The toxicity levels are dropping. The paralytic is barely registering in his system." There was a pause as Vincent spoke on the other end. "I don't know how," Pendleton snapped, running a hand through his hair. "I'm administering the dosage myself, unless someone is tampering with the IV bags." Pendleton stopped. He looked back at the heavy oak doors of the master suite. "No, that's impossible. No one goes in there but the cleaning staff, and they're all idiots. But..." We need to accelerate the timeline. Tonight, Vincent, I'll give him a lethal dose of potassium chloride. It'll stop his heart instantly. We'll call it a massive cardiac event. Bridget clapped her hand over her mouth. Her blood turned to ice. Tonight. They were going to execute Dominic tonight. She waited until Pendleton hurried down the stairs before she rushed back into the master suite, locking the door behind her. Dominic was sitting up, doing quiet, grueling push-ups against the mattress to rebuild his chest muscles. He stopped the moment he saw her face. "What is it?" he demanded, his voice sharp and authoritative. "Pendleton knows." Bridget gasped, her chest heaving. "He ran your blood. He knows the poison isn't working. He told Vincent they are moving up the timeline. He's going to inject you with potassium chloride tonight. It'll cause a heart attack." Dominic's eyes darkened, a terrifying storm brewing in his irises. The mob boss was fully awake now. He didn't panic. He analyzed. "Tonight," Dominic repeated slowly. "Then we are out of time. I am strong enough to pull a trigger, Bridget, but I'm not strong enough to fight my way through 30 armed guards to get to Vincent. I need my loyalists. I need the capos who don't know Vincent is a traitor." "How do we contact them?" Bridget asked desperately. "Your phone was taken." "Vincent took my public phone," Dominic corrected, his lips curling into a vicious sneer. "But I have a black book and an encrypted satellite phone locked in a floor safe in my old office. Vincent uses that office now. If I can get that phone, I can call Carlo and the strike team. They will breach the house and slaughter Vincent's men." "Your office is on the first floor," Bridget said, her mind racing. "Vincent is in there all day. He has a dinner meeting tonight at 8 with the union bosses. He'll be in the dining room," Dominic said, grabbing her hand. His grip was ironclad now. "Bridget, I need you to go into that office. I need you to open the safe, get the phone, and bring it to me before Pendleton comes upstairs with that needle." "Me?" Bridget swallowed hard. "Dom, if there are guards..." "You are the ghost, Bridget," Dominic said fiercely, pulling her close. "You put your cart in front of you and you walk through the shadows. No one looks at you. Use their blindness against them." He rattled off a 6-digit code. "Under the Persian rug, beneath the mahogany desk, there is a false floorboard. Please, Bridget, my life is entirely in your hands." She looked at the man who had called her a queen, the man who had promised to burn the city down for her. She took a deep breath, squaring her broad shoulders. "I'll get the phone," she vowed. The grandfather clock in the foyer struck 8:15 p.m. The Costello estate was a hive of activity. Downstairs in the grand dining room, Vincent Romano was hosting 5 prominent union bosses, securing his reign over the city's construction rackets. The sound of clinking glasses, boisterous laughter, and thick cigar smoke drifted through the sprawling hallways. Bridget pushed her cleaning cart down the first-floor corridor. Her grey uniform felt like a suit of armor and a target all at once. Her heart was beating so violently against her ribs, she was terrified the passing enforcers could hear it. 2 heavily armed guards stood outside the dining room doors. They barely registered her presence as she squeaked by with her cart, heading toward the east wing where Dominic's old study, now Vincent's office, was located. The hallway leading to the office was empty. Bridget pushed the heavy mahogany door open and slipped inside, pulling her cart in behind her. The office was a testament to Vincent's newfound arrogance. He had replaced Dominic's classic leather furniture with gaudy, modern pieces. A half-empty bottle of scotch sat on the massive desk. Bridget didn't waste a second. She moved around the desk, falling heavily to her knees. Her joints ached in protest, but she ignored the pain. She rolled back the corner of the intricate Persian rug. She ran her thick fingers over the polished hardwood floor, searching for the seam Dominic had described. There, a slight imperfection in the wood. She pressed her thumb down hard, and a small panel popped up, revealing a digital keypad. Her hands were shaking so badly, she almost hit the wrong numbers. 472911. A soft click echoed in the quiet room. She pulled the false floorboard up. Inside the dark recess lay a thick leather-bound ledger and a heavy, matte black satellite phone. "Got it!" she whispered, a rush of triumphant relief flooding her system. She grabbed the phone and shoved it deep into the generous cleavage of her bra, adjusting her uniform to ensure the bulky device was completely hidden beneath her heavy chest. She was just rolling the Persian rug back into place when she heard it. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and approaching the office door. "I need the union contracts, Jimmy. I left them on my desk." Vincent's voice echoed from the hallway. Bridget froze. Panic, raw and suffocating, seized her throat. She scrambled to her feet, her heavy body moving with desperate agility. She grabbed her spray bottle of glass cleaner and a rag, spinning around to face the large bay windows just as the office door swung open. Vincent Romano strode into the room, followed by a hulking enforcer named Jimmy. Vincent stopped dead in his tracks, staring at Bridget. For 3 excruciating seconds, the silence in the room was deafening. Bridget stood with her back to the window, the spray bottle clutched in her trembling hands. The satellite phone was cold against her skin, a lethal secret pressing into her ribs. "What the hell are you doing in here?" Vincent snapped, his eyes narrowing in disgust. Bridget instantly dropped her gaze, hunching her shoulders to appear smaller, submissive, stupid. I was told to clean the interior windows on the first floor, Mr. Romano," she stammered, artificially raising the pitch of her voice to sound frightened and pathetic. "Mrs. Gable's orders, sir." Vincent looked at her wide, trembling frame, her frizzy hair, and the sheen of nervous sweat on her flushed face. The suspicion that had momentarily flared in his eyes was instantly extinguished by overwhelming contempt. "You look like a sweating pig," Vincent sneered, walking over to his desk. He sifted through a pile of papers. "Get out of here. You're stinking up the room. Do the windows tomorrow." "Yes, Mr. Romano." "I'm sorry, Mr. Romano," Bridget mumbled, keeping her head bowed. She slowly walked over to her cleaning cart. Every step felt like walking through wet cement. If Vincent looked closely, if he noticed the unnatural bulk beneath her uniform, she was dead. Jimmy the enforcer watched her with blank, dead eyes as she pushed the cart past them and out the door. "Make sure you lock the door behind her, Jimmy," Vincent muttered, finding his contracts. "Can't stand the smell of the help." The heavy mahogany door clicked shut behind her. Bridget leaned heavily against her cart in the empty hallway, violently gasping for air. Her knees buckled slightly, but she caught herself. She had survived. The invisibility had saved her again. She didn't waste another moment. She pushed the cart toward the service elevator, ignoring the protocol that required her to use the stairs. She hit the button for the 3rd floor. It was 8:45 p.m. Pendleton would be arriving soon. She rushed down the 3rd floor hallway, abandoning her cart outside the master suite. She unlocked the door and slipped inside. Dominic was sitting up in bed, fully dressed. He had managed to put on a pair of dark slacks and a black dress shirt he had demanded she steal from his closet days ago. He looked pale, gaunt, but undeniably lethal. The king was preparing for war. "Did you get it?" Dominic asked, his eyes flashing. Bridget reached into her uniform, pulled out the black satellite phone, and placed it into his waiting hands. A cruel, terrifying smile spread across Dominic Costello's face. It was the smile of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. He powered on the phone. It lit up instantly, untraceable and fully charged. "You did it, Bridget," he whispered, dialing a number from memory. He looked up at her, his grey eyes burning with absolute adoration and impending violence. "Now step back and watch me burn my cousin to the ground." The phone rang twice before a deep, gruff voice answered on the other end. "Speak, Carlo," Dominic said, his voice dropping into a raspy, commanding baritone that Bridget had never heard before. It was the voice of the Don. "It's Dom. Gather the strike team. Vincent is a traitor. Pendleton is a dead man, breaching Protocol Alpha. I want them all slaughtered within the hour." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Boss, we thought you were—" "I'm awake, Carlo," Dominic growled. "And I want my house back." He hung up the phone and tossed it onto the nightstand. He slowly swung his legs over the edge of the bed. His muscles trembled slightly from the exertion, but he planted his feet firmly on the floor. He stood up. It was the first time Bridget had seen him standing. He was massive, towering over 6 feet tall, his broad shoulders casting a terrifying silhouette in the dim light. He took a steadying breath, then reached under his mattress, pulling out a heavy, matte black 1911 pistol he had ordered her to retrieve from a lockbox 2 nights ago. He racked the slide. The metallic clack echoed like a death knell in the quiet room. Suddenly, footsteps sounded outside the door, heavy, deliberate, and accompanied by the squeak of a medical cart. "Pendleton," Bridget whispered, her eyes widening in terror. Dominic's eyes locked onto the heavy oak doors. He raised the pistol, aiming it dead center at the wood. "Get behind me, Bridget," he ordered softly. Bridget scrambled backward, pressing herself into the alcove of the bathroom, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. The brass doorknob turned. The lock, which Bridget had purposefully left unlatched, clicked open. Dr. Arthur Pendleton walked into the room, holding a syringe filled with clear liquid, the lethal dose of potassium chloride. He didn't even look up as he pushed his medical cart inside, muttering to himself. "All right, Mr. Costello," Pendleton said with a sick, arrogant sigh. "Time to end the charade." Pendleton looked up toward the bed. It was empty. Before the doctor could process what he was seeing, a massive hand shot out from the shadows, grabbing Pendleton by the throat. Dominic slammed the doctor violently against the wall, lifting him inches off the floor. The syringe clattered harmlessly to the Persian rug. Pendleton's eyes bulged in absolute, unadulterated horror as he stared into the face of the dead man walking. "Hello, Arthur," Dominic whispered, pressing the barrel of the 1911 directly against Pendleton's temple. "I hear you've been looking for a cure." The air in the master suite grew instantly frigid, the sheer malice radiating from Dominic Costello suffocating the room. Dr. Arthur Pendleton dangled from Dominic's grip, his expensive leather loafers kicking frantically at the empty air above the Persian rug. The silver syringe, filled with the lethal dose of potassium chloride, lay discarded near the wheel of the medical cart. Dominic, please!" Pendleton choked out, his face turning a mottled, desperate purple. "It wasn't my idea. Vincent forced me. The Genovese crew backed him. He said they would kill my family." Dominic's grey eyes were dead, devoid of a single ounce of mercy. He lowered the doctor just enough so the man's toes brushed the floor, keeping the barrel of the 1911 pressed so hard against Pendleton's temple that it broke the skin. A thin line of blood trickled down the doctor's pale cheek. "You took an oath to do no harm, Arthur," Dominic rasped, his voice a low, terrifying vibration that rattled Bridget's bones from where she hid in the alcove. "Instead, you watched me rot. You paralyzed me. You let me lie in my own sweat while you laughed with my cousin." "I can fix it," Pendleton sobbed, spittle flying from his lips. "I can run your blood work, clear you for the board. I have money, Dominic. Offshore accounts in the Caymans. I'll give you everything." Dominic tilted his head, a cruel, emotionless smile touching his lips. "I don't want your money, Arthur. I want my medicine." With a swift, brutal motion, Dominic kicked the back of Pendleton's knees, forcing the doctor to crash heavily to the floor. Keeping the gun trained firmly on Pendleton's head, Dominic used his other hand to pick up the discarded syringe from the rug. He tossed it onto the doctor's chest. "Take it," Dominic ordered. Pendleton stared at the clear liquid, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated horror. No, no, Dom, please. It will stop my heart in seconds. Take it, or I shoot you in the stomach and let you bleed out over the next 3 hours, Dominic stated softly. Your choice. 3 seconds. 1. Dominic, I beg you. 2. Dominic's finger tightened visibly on the trigger. Sobbing hysterically, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold the plastic barrel, Pendleton picked up the syringe. He looked at Dominic, searching for a sliver of hesitation, but found only a bottomless black abyss. With a strangled cry, Pendleton jammed the needle into his own thigh and pushed the plunger down. Dominic stepped back. Within 5 seconds, Pendleton gasped, his hands clutching his chest. His eyes rolled back into his head, his body seizing violently against the polished marble baseboards before going entirely, permanently still. Bridget clamped both hands over her mouth, muffling a shocked whimper. She had grown up in a rough neighborhood, but she had never witnessed a man's life extinguished in front of her. Her thick body trembled violently against the wall. Dominic turned to her. The absolute lethality in his posture softened a fraction. He walked over, his massive frame towering over her, and gently pulled her hands away from her face. His thumb brushed a tear from her cheek. Look at me, Bridget, he commanded softly. She forced her eyes up to his. This is my world. It is ugly, and it is built on blood. But you are safe. Do you understand? I will burn this entire state to ash before I let a single drop of this blood touch you. Before Bridget could respond, a sudden muffled thump echoed from downstairs, followed by the distinct sound of shattered glass and a heavy, suppressed gunshot. Pfft! Pfft! Dominic's eyes flashed. Carlo is here. He grabbed 2 spare magazines from the false bottom of his nightstand drawer, shoving them into the waistband of his dark slacks. He checked the chamber of his 1911. Stay behind me. We move through the shadows, just like you said, Dominic instructed, grabbing her hand. His grip was a grounding force, a sudden anchor in the middle of a hurricane. They slipped out of the master suite and into the dimly lit 3rd-floor hallway. The sprawling Costello estate, usually a monument to quiet, suffocating wealth, was transforming into a war zone. Below them, the sounds of chaos erupted. Shouts of alarm, the heavy thud of bodies hitting the imported Italian tile, and the relentless mechanical coughing of silenced automatic weapons. Carlo's strike team, comprised of the most lethal, fiercely loyal enforcers in the Costello syndicate, was moving through the mansion with terrifying surgical precision. They reached the grand mahogany staircase overlooking the foyer. Below, 3 of Vincent's guards lay motionless in pooling blood. 2 of Carlo's men, dressed in tactical black gear, were sweeping the perimeter. One of them looked up, raising his weapon, but froze when he saw Dominic. The enforcer's eyes widened in disbelief. He instantly lowered his rifle, tapping his earpiece. Boss is secure. He's on his feet. I repeat, the Don is walking. Dominic descended the stairs, pulling Bridget tightly behind his broad shoulder. Where is my cousin? Dominic barked. Dining room, boss, Carlo's voice answered as the scarred, imposing underboss stepped out from the kitchen corridor, a submachine gun slung across his chest. Carlo looked at Dominic, then at the terrified, plus-sized woman in the grey cleaning uniform clutching his hand. Carlo asked no questions. He simply nodded. We have the room surrounded. The union bosses are still inside with him. We waited for your order. Nobody touches Vincent but me, Dominic said, his voice a lethal, resonant growl. He let go of Bridget's hand and turned to face her. Wait here with Carlo. Bridget shook her head, her frizzy hair flying. Adrenaline, thick and potent, was overriding her terror. I'm not letting you out of my sight, Dom. You're still recovering. What if you collapse? Carlo raised a thick eyebrow at her audacity, But Dominic just smirked, a dark, thoroughly captivated expression. "Then you push me the rest of the way," Dominic murmured. "Stay close." The grand dining room doors were made of solid, heavy oak, imported from a monastery in Florence. Dominic didn't bother opening them with his hands. He raised his heavy leather boot and kicked the double doors directly in the center. The sheer force shattered the brass latch, sending the doors crashing open against the walls with the sound of a bomb detonating. Inside, the scene froze in absolute horror. Vincent Romano sat at the head of the long mahogany table, a crystal glass of Macallan 25 suspended halfway to his mouth. Around the table sat 5 prominent figures of the New York underworld, including Richard Dick Hoffman, the notoriously corrupt head of the Stevedores Union. The table was littered with expensive steaks, lobster shells, and scattered construction contracts. Vincent's face drained of every drop of color. He looked like a man staring at a ghost rising from a freshly dug grave. The glass slipped from his fingers, shattering violently against the floor, spilling amber liquid across the antique rugs. "Good evening, gentlemen," Dominic said, stepping into the warm glow of the crystal chandeliers. His gun hung loosely at his side, but his presence filled every inch of the massive room. "I hope I'm not interrupting dessert." Carlo and 4 heavily armed enforcers filed in behind Dominic, fanning out and leveling their weapons at the table. Bridget stayed near the doorway, her broad frame blending into the heavy velvet curtains. She watched, her heart pounding, as the true king of the underworld reclaimed his throne. "Dom!" Vincent stammered, his voice cracking. He pushed his chair back, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "Dom, this is... Pendleton told me you were dying. He said it was a virus. I was just holding the family together. I was protecting your legacy." Dominic walked slowly toward the table, his footsteps echoing ominously. "My legacy. You were selling my docs to the Russians, Vincent. You were aligning with the Genovese family, and you were paying a doctor $10,000 a week to pump rat poison into my veins while I lay paralyzed in my own bed." The union bosses around the table exchanged panicked, terrified glances. Hoffman slowly raised his hands, sweating profusely. "Dominic, we didn't know. We swear to God, we thought you were terminal. Vincent told us..." "Shut your mouth, Richard, or I'll have Carlo cut out your tongue," Dominic snapped, his eyes never leaving his cousin. Vincent's arrogance, the cocky swagger he had paraded around the house for the last 6 months, entirely evaporated. He fell to his knees beside his chair, sobbing openly. "Please, Dom, we're blood. We're family. It was jealousy, okay? You had everything. The power, the fear, the city. I just wanted to be seen. I wanted respect." "Respect is earned, Vincent," Dominic said, standing over his cowering cousin. "It isn't stolen while a man is trapped inside his own body." Suddenly, the dynamic in the room shifted. A union boss at the far end of the table, a heavily built man aligned with the Russian mob, recognized that there would be no survivors left to tell this tale. He reached beneath his custom-tailored jacket, his hand wrapping around the grip of a concealed revolver. Bridget saw it. From her vantage point by the curtains, her peripheral vision caught the unnatural jerk of the man's shoulder. "Dom, on your left!" Bridget screamed, her voice tearing through the tense air. Simultaneously, she didn't just stand there. Operating on pure instinct and the adrenaline of a woman fighting for the only man who had ever truly seen her, Bridget lunged forward. She slammed her heavy, 260-pound frame directly into a massive brass serving cart laden with heavy silver chafing dishes. The cart careened forward like a freight train, crashing violently into the union boss just as he drew his weapon. The impact hit him directly in the ribs. The man shrieked as boiling water and hot eau jus from the chafing dishes poured over his lap, throwing his aim wildly off course. Bang! The union boss's bullet shattered a crystal chandelier above them. Dominic didn't even flinch. He pivoted on his heel, raised the 1911 in a fluid, blindingly fast motion, and put a single bullet directly between the eyes of the man Bridget had just neutralized. The man slumped over the table, dead instantly. The room erupted into screaming, but Carlo's men forcefully shoved the remaining Union bosses face down onto the floor, pressing the barrels of their rifles into the backs of their expensive suits. Dominic slowly turned his attention back to Vincent, who was now trembling so violently he looked like he was having a seizure. Dominic then looked over at Bridget. She was breathing heavily, holding her bruised shoulder where she had impacted the cart. But she was standing tall. She wasn't cowering. She was a warrior in a grey apron. A look of profound, terrifying devotion washed over Dominic's face. He looked back down at his cousin. "You see that woman, Vincent?" Dominic whispered, pointing the barrel of his gun toward Bridget. "You treated her like garbage. You treated her like she was invisible. You let her push a cart right past your face while you plotted my murder, because you were too arrogant to look at a woman who didn't fit into your pathetic, shallow world view." Vincent looked at Bridget, genuine confusion and terror mixing in his weeping eyes. "The cleaning lady? Dom, please, I don't understand." "I know you don't," Dominic said coldly. "She is the one who figured it out. She is the one who smuggled the cure into my room. She is the one who walked into your office tonight and stole the phone right out from under your feet while you called her a pig." Vincent's jaw dropped. The realization that his entire empire, his massive, foolproof assassination plot, had been completely dismantled by the fat cleaning lady he had mocked hours ago, shattered whatever remained of his sanity. He let out a hysterical, broken laugh. "She saved my life," Dominic said, cocking the hammer of the 1911. "Which means everything I own belongs to her, and she doesn't like you." "Dom, no, wait." Bang! The gunshot rang out, absolute and final. Vincent Romano collapsed onto the intricate Persian rug, his blood mingling with the spilled Macallan. The traitor was dead. The king was back. Dominic lowered the weapon. He didn't look at the body. He didn't look at the Union bosses groveling on the floor. He walked straight past his loyal enforcers, stepping over broken glass and blood, until he reached Bridget. She looked up at him, her chest heaving. Without a word, Dominic Costello, the most feared man in New York, dropped his gun to the floor, wrapped his massive arms around her thick waist, and pulled her flush against his chest, burying his face into her frizzy hair. "You're brilliant," he murmured fiercely into her neck, entirely unbothered by the audience of heavily armed men watching them. "You're absolutely, terrifyingly brilliant." 6 months later, the Costello syndicate was stronger, more paranoid, and deadlier than ever before. But the true shock to New York's elite wasn't Dominic Costello's miraculous resurrection. It was the woman sitting beside him. In a heavily guarded private dining room at Le Bernardin, Bridget wore a custom emerald green silk gown from Bergdorf Goodman. It beautifully hugged her thick waist and generous curves, with diamonds sparkling at her throat. The invisible, overworked cleaning lady was dead. In her place sat a woman who understood exactly how much power she wielded. Across the table, Dominic looked immaculate in a crisp black tuxedo. His health had entirely returned, but those cold, calculating grey eyes that terrified the city were entirely soft and completely obsessed whenever they looked at her. "You're staring, Dom?" Bridget smiled, taking a slow sip of her vintage Bordeaux. "I'm admiring my empire," Dominic purred, leaning forward. "Just make sure Carlo keeps the pensions intact for the dock workers," Bridget advised smoothly, cutting a piece of her poached halibut. "I read the ledgers you left out. If you starve the bottom tier, they revolt. Keep them comfortable, and they'll never look closely at your cargo containers." Dominic's lips curled into a predatory smile. Her strategic brilliance was his favorite weapon. "I will handle it exactly as you say, Mia Regina." The heavy oak doors opened, interrupting their quiet intimacy. Carlo escorted in Sal the Snake Maranzano, a Lucchese family capo, for a pre-arranged peace meeting regarding a border dispute in Tribeca. Sal walked in, a sleazy, aging mobster reeking of cologne. He forced a respectful nod to Dominic, but his eyes immediately drifted to Bridget. A flicker of blatant, ugly disgust crossed his face. He was used to mob bosses parading around with starving 22-year-old models, not a heavy-set woman taking up space at an elegant table. "Didn't realize we were doing dinner with the help tonight, Dom." Sal chuckled, an arrogant, sneering sound. Thought this was a private sit-down. The temperature in the room plummeted to absolute zero. Bridget didn't flinch. She simply set her wineglass down, maintaining perfect eye contact with Sal. Dominic didn't yell. He stood up with terrifying calm, walked slowly around the table, and stopped right behind Sal. Before the capo could register the danger, Dominic grabbed the back of Sal's thick neck. With brutal, unyielding force, Dominic slammed the man's face directly into the table. China shattered. Silverware flew. Sal screamed as his nose broke with a sickening crunch against the heavy wood. Dominic held the bleeding man down, leaning in close to his ear. "You are breathing the air in her room," Dominic whispered, his voice vibrating with a psychotic, possessive rage. "This woman dragged me out of the grave while men like you dug the hole. You will look at her like she is God, Sal, or I will carve your eyes out of your skull and feed them to the stray dogs. The Tribeca territory belongs to my wife now. Get out of my sight." Sal scrambled to his feet, clutching his ruined face, and bolted out the door, sobbing, with Carlo following right behind him. The violence had erupted and dissipated in less than a minute. Dominic turned back to Bridget, his chest heaving slightly, his eyes entirely black with adrenaline. He walked over to her side of the table, gently taking her plump hand and pressing a reverent kiss to her knuckles. "I apologize for the mess, Bridget," he murmured softly. Bridget looked at the blood on the table, then up at the ruthless, terrifying man who worshipped the very ground she walked on. She reached up, her thick fingers tracing the sharp line of his jaw. She had walked into a lion's den 6 months ago expecting to be torn apart. Instead, she had become the master of the beast. "It's all right, Dom." Bridget smiled, her voice dripping with dark, absolute authority. "I know how to clean up a spill. The invisible woman didn't just survive the underworld, she conquered it." Bridget proved that true power doesn't come from fitting into society's shallow molds, but from the courage to step out of the shadows and claim what's yours. Dominic Costello learned that the most lethal weapon in his arsenal wasn't a gun, but the brilliant, beautiful queen who ruled his heart and his empire. If you were captivated by Bridget's incredible journey from an overlooked cleaning lady to the untouchable queen of the New York Mafia, smash that like button. Share this story with someone who loves a dark romance packed with revenge, loyalty, and jaw-dropping twists. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another thrilling, real-life inspired drama. Drop a comment below. What would you have done if you found the poison? See you in the next video.